The private dining room at the Plaza overlooked Central Park on a crisp October morning, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows onto the elegant table where my extended family had gathered to celebrate Mom's 60th birthday. Crystal champagne flutes caught the light, fresh orchids adorned every surface, and the gentle clink of silverware against fine china created the soundtrack for what should have been a perfect family celebration. I sat between my cousin Maria and my Aunt Sofia, picking at my eggs Benedict while listening to the familiar rhythm of family conversation. Updates about jobs, kids, vacation plans, and the endless comparisons that seemed to define every Rivera family gathering. As the youngest of my generation at 28, I'd grown accustomed to being the subject of well-meaning concern and thinly veiled criticism from relatives who couldn't quite figure out what I was doing with my life. "Isabella Mija, you look so thin," my grandmother said from across the table, her weathered hands gesturing toward my plate. "Are you eating enough? Living alone in the city, it's hard to take care of yourself properly." "I'm eating fine, abuela," I replied, smiling at Carmen Rivera, the family matriarch who'd emigrated from Puerto Rico 60 years ago and still worried about every grandchild as if they were starving refugees. "She's not taking care of herself," my father interjected, cutting into his steak with more force than necessary. "Living downtown in some tiny apartment, no proper kitchen, probably eating takeout every night." Roberto Rivera was a successful contractor who'd built his business from nothing, providing a comfortable middle-class life for our family in Queens. At 58, he was proud of what he'd accomplished and frustrated by what he saw as his daughter's lack of practical ambition. "The apartment has a kitchen, Dad," I said patiently. "A kitchen the size of a closet," Mom added, though her tone was gentler than Dad's. "We've seen it, Isabella. It's barely big enough for one person to stand in." Elena Rivera had supported my father's business for 30 years while raising 3 children, and she'd developed the diplomatic skills necessary to navigate family tensions. But even her patience was being tested by what she perceived as my stubborn refusal to embrace conventional success. "It works for me," I said, taking a sip of mimosa and trying to redirect the conversation. "This brunch is beautiful, Mom. The Plaza always does events perfectly." "Don't change the subject," my older brother Carlos said, leaning forward with the concerned expression of someone who'd appointed himself the family voice of reason. "We're worried about you, is it? You're 28 years old, living like a college student, working some vague consulting job that none of us understand." Carlos was 32, a successful accountant with a wife, 2 kids, and a house in Westchester that he'd bought with help from Dad. He represented everything our parents hoped their children would achieve, and he never missed an opportunity to contrast his stability with my unconventional choices. "My consulting work is going fine," I said. "Define fine," my sister Patricia chimed in from the other end of the table. At 30, she was a marketing manager for a pharmaceutical company, married to a lawyer and pregnant with her second child. "Because fine usually means you're barely getting by." "I'm not barely getting by." "Then why are you still renting that tiny place instead of buying something proper?" Dad's voice was getting louder, drawing glances from other diners in the restaurant. "Your brother bought his house when he was 26. Patricia bought her condo at 28. You're running out of time to build equity." The equity lecture. I'd heard variations of this speech at every family gathering for the past 2 years. Dad couldn't understand why someone with a Columbia MBA would choose to rent a tiny apartment, instead of buying a house in the suburbs and settling into traditional adult responsibilities. "Maybe I like renting," I said. "Nobody likes renting," Uncle Miguel said, joining the conversation from his position at the head of the table. "Renting is what you do when you can't afford to buy." Miguel Rivera was Dad's older brother, a successful restaurant owner who'd parlayed a single neighborhood diner into a chain of 6 upscale establishments across Queens and Manhattan. He was the family success story, the immigrant's son who'd achieved the American dream through hard work and smart investments. "Isabella has always been the dreamer in the family," Aunt Sofia added with a sympathetic smile. "Remember when she wanted to be an artist? Then a writer? Now it's this consulting thing. She'll figure it out eventually." The consulting thing. That's how my family referred to Rivera Property Solutions, the real estate investment and development company I'd built over the past 5 years. To them, I was an underachieving dreamer who worked from home doing mysterious computer work. They had no idea that RPS had become one of the most successful boutique real estate firms in Manhattan, with a portfolio worth over $400 million. She needs to figure it out soon, Dad continued, warming to his favorite topic. Look around this table. Everyone else has built something real. Carlos has his practice. Patricia has her career and family. Miguel has his restaurants. What does Isabella have? A tiny apartment and a laptop. Dad, Mom said gently, it's my birthday. Can we talk about something else? No, Elena, someone needs to say this. Dad's voice carried across the dining room now, and I could see other families looking in our direction. Your daughter lives in a tiny apartment downtown. She has no savings, no assets, no plan for the future. At some point, reality has to matter. I have assets, I said quietly. Like what? Carlos challenged. Your laptop? Your 10-year-old Honda. I drive a Tesla Model S, I corrected. Which you're probably leasing because you can't afford to buy, Patricia said. Isabella, we're not trying to be mean. We're trying to help you understand that you need to make better financial decisions. Better financial decisions, I repeated, feeling the familiar frustration that came with these family interventions. Yes, Dad said emphatically. Like your cousin Maria. She just bought a beautiful 3-bedroom condo in Astoria. 2 parking spaces, modern kitchen, building gym. That's what success looks like. Maria, who was 26 and worked as a physical therapist, blushed at being held up as the family exemplar of responsible adulthood. It's not that big a deal, Uncle Roberto. It is a big deal, Dad insisted. Maria understood that you have to invest in your future. You can't just drift through your 20s hoping things will work out. I'm not drifting. Then what are you doing? Uncle Miguel asked. Explain to us what this consulting business actually is. What do you consult about? Who are your clients? How much money do you make? The questions hung in the air like an ultimatum. My family was staging an intervention, convinced that tough love was needed to save me from a lifetime of financial irresponsibility. They had no idea that my last quarterly tax payment had been larger than most of their annual salaries combined. I consult on real estate investments, I said carefully. Real estate, Dad scoffed. Isabella, you rent a 500-square-foot apartment. What could you possibly know about real estate? More than you might think. Prove it, Carlos said. Show us a client contract, a business plan, something concrete. Carlos, Mom warned, you're being aggressive. Someone has to be aggressive, he replied. We've been tiptoeing around this for years while Isabella lives in denial about her situation. What situation is that? The situation where you're nearly 30 years old with no career prospects, no savings and no plan for the future, Patricia said bluntly. We love you, but we're not going to enable your fantasy life anymore. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Whitfield and Associates, my real estate agents handling the sale of one of my most valuable properties. I'd been expecting this call all week, but the timing couldn't have been worse. I should take this, I said, reaching for my phone. During Mom's birthday brunch? Dad asked disapprovingly. Can't your consulting work wait an hour? It's important. More important than family? Uncle Miguel shook his head. This is what I'm talking about. No priorities, no respect for what matters. The phone was still ringing. I could let it go to voicemail, but they'd probably just call back and the family lecture would continue indefinitely. Sometimes the only way to end a conversation is to change the subject completely. I'll put it on speaker, I said, accepting the call. This will just take a minute. Ms. Rivera? The voice of Jonathan Whitfield, senior partner at Manhattan's most exclusive real estate brokerage, filled the dining room. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. No, it's fine. I'm with family, so I have you on speaker. Wonderful. I have excellent news about the Penthouse listing. The table had gone quiet. My family was listening with the polite attention people give to strangers' phone conversations, not yet understanding that this call was about to shatter every assumption they'd made about my life. The Manhattan Penthouse sold for $45 million as requested, Jonathan continued, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a broker who'd just earned a substantial commission. The buyers were extremely impressed with the property and agreed to our asking price without negotiation. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the soft jazz music playing in the restaurant's main dining room, the distant sound of traffic on Fifth Avenue, the barely audible hum of the air conditioning system. But at our table, nothing. $45 million, Uncle Miguel whispered. That's correct, Jonathan continued, oblivious to the shocked faces around me. The closing is scheduled for next Friday, and the funds will be wired to your account as soon as all documents are signed. Congratulations, Ms. Rivera. This was one of the smoothest high-end transactions I've handled this year. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate all your work on this. Of course. Will you be reinvesting the proceeds in another Manhattan property, or are you looking at other markets? I'm considering several options. Can we discuss specifics tomorrow? Absolutely. I'll call your office in the morning. Have a wonderful weekend. The call ended, leaving my family staring at me with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief to dawning comprehension. $45 million, Dad said slowly. You sold a penthouse for $45 million. I sold one of my properties, yes. One of your properties? Carlos's voice cracked slightly. How many properties do you own? Currently, 17 residential units and 4 commercial buildings in Manhattan, plus 3 mixed-use developments in Brooklyn. 24 properties, Mom said weakly. Plus a small office building in Queens that I bought as an investment 3 years ago. Patricia was calculating frantically on her phone. If you sold a penthouse for $45 million, what are your other properties worth? I pulled out my phone and opened the portfolio tracking app one checked religiously every morning. According to the latest valuations, my total real estate portfolio is worth approximately $387 million. The number seemed to physically stagger them. Uncle Miguel gripped the edge of the table. Carlos's champagne flute slipped from his fingers, and Dad made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. $387 million, Abuela said, crossing herself. That's just the real estate holdings, I clarified. Rivera Property Solutions also manages investment portfolios for high-net-worth clients, which generates additional revenue. Rivera Property Solutions, Dad repeated. Your consulting company is one of Manhattan's most successful boutique real estate investment firms. We manage over $800 million in assets for private clients. $800 million, Maria whispered. This year we're projecting revenue of $47 million, with net profits around $23 million. The silence stretched on as my family processed information that contradicted everything they thought they knew about my life and career. But you live in a tiny apartment, Mom said finally. I live in a 2,800 square foot penthouse on the Upper West Side. It has 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a private terrace and views of Central Park. You said it was tiny. You assumed it was tiny because I described it as cozy and efficient. I prefer understated living spaces. Understated, Carlos echoed. Your penthouse is understated. The penthouse I just sold was in Tribeca, 4,500 square feet, 3 terraces, private elevator access. I bought it as an investment property 2 years ago and never actually lived there. Dad was shaking his head like he was trying to wake up from a dream. You bought a 4,500 square foot penthouse as an investment? Real estate in prime Manhattan locations consistently outperforms other asset classes. The Tribeca property appreciated 34% during my ownership period. 34% appreciation, Uncle Miguel said, and I could see his restaurant owner's mind calculating the numbers. Plus rental income of $28,000 per month while I owned it. You were collecting rent of $28,000 per month, Patricia said slowly. From tenants who signed a 2-year lease with an option to purchase. When they decided to buy instead of renewing the lease, I sold it to them at market value. Aunt Sofia had been quiet throughout this revelation, but now she leaned forward with the shrewd expression of someone who'd spent 40 years managing family finances. Isabella Mija, how much money do you actually have? I considered the question, looking around the table at these people who'd spent the morning lecturing me about financial responsibility and life planning. My personal net worth, including real estate holdings, investment accounts, and business equity, is approximately $127 million. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I watched my family's faces as they tried to process the information, saw the moment when they realized that their assumptions about my life had been completely wrong. $127 million, Dad said, his voice barely audible. As of last quarter's valuation. The number fluctuates with market conditions. You're worth over $100 million, Carlos said. And you've been letting us worry about your finances for years, Patricia added, her voice a mixture of amazement and hurt. I've been letting you worry about what you perceived as my finances. I never asked for your concern. But why? Mom asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. Why not tell us about your success? Why let us think you were struggling? I looked around the table at my family. These people who'd raised me, supported me through college, and genuinely believed they were helping by staging interventions about my lifestyle choices. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I've achieved. Because I wanted to prove to myself that I could build something significant without anyone being able to say I succeeded because of family money or connections. We don't have connections in real estate, Uncle Miguel pointed out. Exactly. Which is why I knew that whatever I built would be entirely my own accomplishment. But we've been treating you like... Dad's voice trailed off as he realized the implications of their behavior. Like a failure. Like someone who needed guidance and intervention and tough love to get their life on track. Because we thought you were failing, Mom said softly. Because you saw someone who lived differently than you expected and concluded that different meant unsuccessful. Carlos was still staring at his phone, apparently reading about my company for the first time. Rivera Property Solutions has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Commercial Real Estate Weekly. They call you one of New York's most savvy young investors. The business press has been supportive of what we're doing. What you're doing, Patricia corrected, is building a real estate empire. I'm building a business that helps people make smart investment decisions while creating value in communities I care about. Creating value, Dad repeated. Isabella, you own nearly $400 million worth of Manhattan real estate. Real estate that provides housing for families, office space for businesses, and economic opportunities for the neighborhoods where I invest. Uncle Miguel leaned back in his chair, looking at me with new eyes. You're not just successful. You're more successful than anyone in this family has ever been. I'm successful at something I'm passionate about. Just like you built your restaurants, just like Dad built his contracting business. But the scale... Miguel shook his head. Isabella, you're operating at a level most of us can't even comprehend. Which is exactly why I kept it private. I didn't want money to change our relationships. I didn't want every family conversation to become about business advice or investment opportunities. So instead you let us lecture you about responsibility, Carlos said ruefully. I let you care about me the way families care about each other. Even if your caring was based on incorrect assumptions. Mom was crying now, tears of pride and embarrassment mixing together. I'm so sorry, Mija. We've been treating you like a child who couldn't manage her own life. You've been treating me like someone you love enough to worry about. That's actually pretty special. But we were wrong about everything, Patricia said. Your apartment, your career, your financial situation, we got it all completely wrong. You got the external details wrong. But you got the important things right. You saw someone you cared about and wanted to help. That matters more than whether you understood my living situation. Dad was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd learned about his youngest daughter. Finally he spoke. Isabella, I owe you an apology. We all do. Dad, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I've been criticizing your choices for years, treating you like you didn't know what you were doing, when all along you were building something extraordinary. You were being a father. Fathers worry about their children's futures. But I wasn't trusting your judgment. You clearly knew exactly what you were doing, even when it didn't look that way to the rest of us. Abuela, who'd been silent through most of this revelation, finally found her voice. Mija, are you happy? Really, truly happy with this life you've built? I thought about my daily routine, analyzing market trends, negotiating property acquisitions, working with architects and contractors on development projects, managing client portfolios, and building a company culture where passionate people could do meaningful work. I love what I do, Abuela. I love the challenge of identifying undervalued properties, the satisfaction of creating beautiful living spaces, and the knowledge that my work contributes to the city where I grew up. So yes, I'm incredibly happy. Then that's all that matters, she said firmly. Success means nothing if it doesn't bring joy. But why the secrecy? Maria asked, speaking for the first time since the phone call. Why not share your success with people who love you? Because I was afraid of this, I gestured around the table. I was afraid that once you knew about the money, You'd start seeing me differently. That suddenly my opinions would matter more, that you'd treat me like a successful businesswoman instead of just Isabella. You are a successful businesswoman, Mom said. But I'm also still your daughter. Still the person who calls you every Sunday, still the person who brings homemade flan to family gatherings, still the person who cries at telenovelas and buys too many shoes. The person who we thought couldn't afford to buy shoes, Carlos said, laughing despite himself. The person who chooses to buy shoes at reasonable prices because she doesn't need to prove anything to anyone through conspicuous consumption. Dad stood up and walked around the table to where I was sitting. Isabella, I'm proud of you. Not because you're worth $100 million, but because you followed your vision and built something meaningful. Thanks, Dad. And I'm sorry we didn't see what you were accomplishing. We should have trusted that you knew what you were doing. You should have asked more questions instead of making assumptions. But I also should have been more open about my work. Why weren't you? Patricia asked. What were you really afraid of? I looked around the table at my family, successful, hard-working people who'd built good lives through dedication and sacrifice. They weren't failures or disappointments. They were just operating at a different scale than I was. I was afraid you'd start treating me like I was different. Like I was somehow better or more important than everyone else. I was afraid money would create distance between us. Money doesn't create distance, Uncle Miguel said thoughtfully. Secrets create distance. He was right. The secrecy had created exactly the problem I'd been trying to avoid, a barrier between me and the people I loved most. You're right, I admitted. Keeping this secret has made things worse, not better. So what happens now? Mom asked, wiping away her tears with her napkin. Now you know the truth. And hopefully we can build relationships based on who I actually am, not who you thought I was. Who you actually are, Dad said, is more successful than any of us imagined. Who I actually am is someone who loves her family enough to buy her mother the best birthday brunch in Manhattan. At the Plaza, Mom said, looking around the elegant dining room as if seeing it for the first time. Where I have a corporate account because I bring clients here regularly. Corporate account, Carlos repeated. Of course you do. The waiter approached our table with a bottle of Dom Perignon and fresh glasses. Compliments of the house, he said professionally. Manager Rodriguez wanted to congratulate Ms. Rivera on her recent business success. Manager Rodriguez knows you? Patricia asked weakly. I've done several real estate deals for Plaza Hotel investors. Eduardo and I have worked together on multiple projects. Multiple projects, Dad echoed. With the Plaza Hotel. As the champagne was poured and my family continued processing the revelations of the morning, I realized that keeping my success secret hadn't protected anyone. It had just prevented them from sharing in the joy of what I'd accomplished. To Mom, I said, raising my glass of Dom Perignon, who taught me that success isn't about what you achieve, but about staying true to your values while you achieve it. To Isabella, Mom replied, her voice strong despite her tears, who achieved more than we ever dreamed possible and remained exactly the daughter we raised her to be. To family, Dad added, and to daughters who surprise us in the most wonderful ways. To family, we all echoed, and for the first time in years I felt completely at peace with both my success and my relationships. The rest of the brunch passed in a blur of questions about the business, stories about property acquisitions, and plans for future family gatherings that wouldn't involve interventions about my lifestyle choices. My relatives wanted to understand how I'd built something so significant while living so modestly, and I found myself enjoying the opportunity to share my passion for real estate development with people who genuinely cared about my happiness. One more question, Uncle Miguel said as we prepared to leave. The tiny apartment we've been worried about, where exactly is it? I pulled out my phone and showed them photos from my real estate app. It's a penthouse at the Century on the Upper West Side. 3 bedrooms, 2,800 square feet, private terrace overlooking Central Park. That's tiny. Maria asked, scrolling through the photos. It's efficient. I don't need a lot of space since I travel frequently for business. Business travel, Dad said, shaking his head. To buy more $100 million properties. To identify undervalued assets and create value for clients and communities. The money is a byproduct of doing work I love. As we left the plaza that afternoon, walking out into the crisp October air with Central Park spread before us, I realized that sometimes the most important revelations happen not when you're ready to make them, but when your family needs to hear them. Isabella, Mom said, linking her arm through mine as we walked toward the street. Thank you for the most memorable 60th birthday I could have imagined. Thank you for raising me to believe that anything was possible if I was willing to work for it. Even if we didn't recognize the work you were doing? Especially because you didn't recognize it. It means I built something that was completely my own. And now it's something we can all be proud of together. Sometimes the best birthday gift you can give your mother isn't an expensive brunch at a luxury hotel. It's the gift of finally trusting her with the truth about who you've become, even when that truth involves owning $387 million worth of Manhattan real estate and being worth $127 million at the age of 28. The phone call that had interrupted our family celebration had revealed more than just a real estate transaction. It had revealed years of hidden success, secret achievements, and the complex dynamics that can exist between love and understanding in families who care deeply about each other but don't always see clearly. As we walked through Central Park that afternoon, my family finally understood that their worry had been misplaced, their interventions unnecessary, and their love more important than they'd ever realized. And I finally understood that keeping success secret doesn't protect the people you love. It just prevents them from celebrating with you when your dreams come true.